So I don't know most of these players, at least on an intimate level. Like whatever. Take that for however the fuck you want to take it, I guess, right? Like you're gonna do whatever the fuck you want to do with that. But I'm not gonna bullshit it here. I really don't pay that much attention to Academy, other than from what I hear from other analysts. Like I like that old school shit, or shit I'm familiar with. Like give me that real hip hop, like that. I don't know, like that Nas shit or something. Like they shooting, ha, made you look. No, like really, I really am shooting. But let's go ahead and get into the actual lineup here, because it's filled with a lot of names I think many people won't recognize, at least that don't tune in or haven't been kind of in depth in the scene. I guess even myself, I don't know some of these guys. So it's Revenge in the top lane. There's Xerxes and jungle, Insanity in mid lane with Reyes at ADC, and then Destiny as support. So let's start with some players that I have at least some, small inklings about or some thoughts on. So let's start with Revenge, because I have heard of this guy, and I know that he used to be he was basically a two-trick, right? He was a Riven and a Jace player back in the day, and this was not even that far back in the day. This was like 2017, shit like that. And he climbed to the top of the ladder. Actually, he got rank 1 before. So I'm excited to see how he develops, I guess, within the LCS. Only because I want to see how his champion pool has developed. I don't think there's a whole lot of evidence to say that, he has this nice champion pool now. He did play over an academy for FlyQuest in 2020. And I actually find it kind of funny, because I know that both him and Viper are friends, and they both played for FlyQuest as well too, and they were both Riven 1 tricks. So I'm wondering if he's gonna fall to the same fate as Viper had, which was basically, I thought Viper got put in way too soon. He still needed to work on his champion pool a little bit more, his style a little bit more. So I'm wondering if that's going to be the same case with Revenge. So only time will tell, but I'm still interested in the experiment itself. And now a lot of people were saying that, why didn't they go with someone like Solo, or Fake God or something like that? And I'm honestly just as clueless as everyone else about this pickup. But, like I said, I didn't watch any of his academy games or anything. But one thing that I did notice, at least just glancing through his match history and whatnot, at least in professional games, was that he didn't really catch a whole lot of Riven or Jace bans. And that's kind of peculiar. And it's not too awkward, right? Because that wasn't particularly the biggest meta. But at least Riven, or at least a Viper, Freudian slip there, at least Viper caught some Riven bans, right? Whenever he would play, he would often catch Riven bans because, people were afraid of it and him pulling it out, and he's just such a good fucking Riven anyways. So I just find it curious that maybe that was a sign that the team themselves didn't want to play through Revenge in terms of him playing Riven, because obviously he probably could have, but maybe they just didn't feel comfortable doing that. Maybe that was a weakness of his teammates, an indictment of his own teammates, rather than an indictment of himself and maybe his champion pool or his skill. I'm not sure which one or the other that it was, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt for there. But I'm still excited to see this player and just see how many champions he could pull out to a high degree. Now, moving on to jungle, Xerxes. He's obviously a carryover from Origin when Guihoto and him worked together. So I like that aspect. And to be fair, I didn't watch Origins games or LEC much for that matter last year, but historically, I've always seen Xerxes as more of a facilitator and someone who understands jungle routes, and that's probably his biggest strength. And so with that said, and whether that has changed or not, I'm not actually sure because I haven't really watched much of his games at all. So I'm excited to see exactly how he adapts into the North American scene and whatnot. It's clear that his entire team isn't the strongest in this terms of, just firepower itself. And now this is the second year to where Immortals have decided to go without firepower. The first instance was because they just fucked up and they spent all their money on Xmithy, and then they had no budget left over for everything else. So they kind of had to create a hodgepodge roster that didn't really make sense on paper. This one actually makes a little bit more sense in just the philosophy of maybe development and whatnot. So I can get the idea from that sense. Now, bot lane, I'm just going to be honest, I've never heard of the ADC at all. And the support player I have in Destiny, but he really hasn't crossed the grapevine that much. People haven't really been clamoring about this Destiny guy coming from Oceania, but he was in some pretty big teams, right? He was in I think Dire Wolves and Mammoth. I think he was in Chiefs before too. So I mean, he's got the pedigree at least in that sense, but since he hasn't been one of those standout players in terms of everyone talking about him, I have a little bit of a concern in that sense, right? Like he's not a fucking Surnefire or something. So we'll see, but it sounds like a decent pickup, I would say. I don't hate it. Now let's skip over to the coaching staff, because this is, I think, where things get real interesting. Because what I mainly see is that Jensen Go is going to be the academy head coach, which is nice. And I assume that he's going to be working a little bit with the LCS team as well too. But it's mainly going to be Guihoto and then Malacalypse, who basically is known as analyst, and he focuses more on the top lane matchups and whatnot. And he's going to be the assistant coach. Now, I think this is a very good combo in that sense, because Malacalypse he's clearly an experimental kind of coach, right? He likes to figure out different things within the meta, maybe different builds or just different champions that are strong and whatnot. And then you have someone like Jensen Go over in the academy who is very systems based, right? And very just by the book kind of, and he's able to set up systems in that sense and get everything on a solid foundation, which will be really good for academy. And then additionally, I think that Malacalypse might have something to do with vouching for revenge, in the sense that everyone's kind of clueless that this guy was picked up, this top laner was picked up. So I can only determine that because this coach has, such an eye, at least focused towards the top lane, that maybe he had something to do with it. I don't know. That's just my hunch. Going back to Jensen Go, I think he might actually be one of the best coaches within the current Western ecosystem. At least he can transfer over to the Western ecosystem, right? Which is another special thing about him, but is that he's probably one of the best coaches for rookies, in the sense that, like I said, he is able to develop rookies and kind of create a basic foundation for them to understand the game. If you've ever kind of caught his YouTube channel and whatnot, he very much thoroughly explains all kinds of different systems and how to implement these systems, and just it's very systematic thought process in that sense, and he doesn't muck about in terms of trying to get fancy with it or anything. So I feel like that is a really good solid piece, and if there's anything maybe that we should take away from this entire coaching staff is that it's clearly a focus on development. And then you tie this all together with Guihoto, who has a lot of experience, right? He has a lot of professional experience coaching various different teams and whatnot. So you have all that to tie together, and especially just being more of a personable type of coach too, and maybe able to connect multiple different personalities and whatnot. So I really feel like this year is just IMT's developmental year, which is, why I make the joke that, they probably going to be 10th place. But that's at least still with the caveat that it's very clear that they're going for development, right? So I don't have that much of a problem with it versus, last year they just fucked up with developing their entire team on paper, right? It didn't make any fucking sense on paper. But this one actually does kind of make sense on paper. And more specifically, it makes sense in the coaching staff terms and whatnot. So really, I mean, it's kind of shocking to say, but even though I think it's a 10th place team, I don't actually hate it. Like, isn't that a weird thing to think about? Now, granted, yeah, I do want to see the best teams play at the highest level and whatnot. And I think you can construct better rosters than this. But to give for the budget and whatnot, and maybe just looking towards long-term development, maybe you want to spend more money on the coaching staff than you do on the players. That might be saying something, right? That might be saying that you want to develop better systems rather than the better immediate players in that sense, right? And I think from an organizational perspective, that might actually be a pretty good bet. And yeah, sure, you're going to be the laughing stock for the spring split, especially, and probably the summer split too. Let's be honest, you probably aren't going to go to fucking Worlds with this roster, but that's not the expectation, and that is very clear to me at least, and it should be clear to everyone else. So I think actually this is like it's probably going to be the funniest thing, but this is the best 10th place roster that I could actually imagine.